21st Century Reviews, bringing you the review of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. Starring William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, and the rest of the great cast that we've all come to love and know. This movie is by far one of my more favorite ones, as it is the one that actually pretty much ushered the era of TOS out of the universe and ushered in the era of the Next Generation crews to take over. The movie opens with the explosion of the Klingon moon Praxis, the main moon that orbits the Klingon homeworld of Kronos, which also leads us to the introduction of the very familiar USS Excelsior, captained by Captain Hikaru Sulu, who also happens to have another familiar face with him of Commander Rand, whom we've known from the original Star Trek series. This movie, bringing about the potential of the death of the Klingon Empire, is an allusion to the mid-90s issue of the fall of the Soviet Union here on Earth, which was basically the end of major hostilities between the huge superpowers of the United States and the Soviets, and alludes directly to the tensions between the Starfleet, being the Federation, and the Klingon Empire as well. The Excelsior then reports into home base that the explosion has occurred, thus forcing an emergency meeting with Starfleet Command, bringing back Captain Kirk, Captain Spock, and crew to have one final mission aboard the USS Enterprise to help usher in this new era of peace with the Klingon Empire. It doesn't go well. The scene opens with the Commander-in-Chief of Starfleet Command opening the floor to Captain Spock, whom was unexpectedly to stand at the podium and explain the situation. He then acknowledges the fact that he wants Captain Kirk and crew to then lead this peace envoy, despite the fact that he knows Kirk's deep-rooted hatred for the Klingons because of what they did to his son many years prior in Star Trek III. This leads to the protagonist of the idea of that Spock wants the peace, Kirk doesn't desire the peace, but ultimately, as Spock points out, an old proverb, not so much a Vulcan one, but only Nixon could go to China, which was very true in our own history. The Enterprise is then forced out of space dock on this mission that Captain Kirk wants absolutely no part of. We then have to deal with the issues of our main characters fighting with each other over whether or not this is the right or wrong decision. We are also introduced to the young Vulcan character of Valeris, who is a protagonist of sorts that is not really a favorite character of mine. In all honesty, that character should have been a reoccurrence of the Savick character we met in Star Trek 2, 3, and briefly in 4. That character had much more depth and would have made much more of an impact on this particular storyline had they included her into it. But anyway, on with the mission, as they say. En route to meet the Klingons, Spock has a very in-depth conversation with Valeris about what it means to bring about this peace to the galaxy and how important it is. Although eventually they are cut short when eventually the Enterprise then comes nose-to-nose with the Klingon battlecruiser carrying Chancellor Gorkon and his crew to have a dinner on board the Enterprise. Sadly, there's a lot of tension that's going on because Captain Kirk doesn't want to admit that, in all honesty, these Klingons are not the Klingons he expected to see. He expected to see basically bloodthirsty, vicious, murderous type killers that only are interested in basically mayhem and destruction. I don't think he was prepared for the thoughtful nature of Chancellor Gorkon, as played by David Warner in this film. David Warner's character in this is really an amazing feat, considering that all the Klingons we meet before and after this are very different from this. It honestly did make me wonder how this particular, Chancellor would have been put into office when we're, in the Next Generation. We were able to see just how, their chancellors are elected into their positions, and you have to be quite the vicious warrior type, interested in conquering and conquest and all of those things to really want that position, and he is very much different than that. But it was referenced that these characters were more Shakespearean and aristocratic, and even referenced as being more imperial-like than the warrior class counterparts that we see in the previous films and ultimately in the Next Generation TV series that was readily going on at the time. Very, very different tone. At this dinner, we are introduced to Kirk's nemesis in this movie, General Chang, captained by Christopher Plummer. An amazing performance by the actor. Again, a very different look for the Klingons, but his demeanor and his tone is very similar to what we're used to. But again, very different look. But I actually rather enjoyed the look of him in this movie. It was a very good look. Ultimately, though, his true colors are seen after the attack of the Klingon battlecruiser, supposedly by the Enterprise, but we come to find out later is a different entity altogether. And, Christopher Plummer's portrayal of the character is very interesting. To be honest, though, one of the things that detracts me from this is all the Shakespearean quoting. Had they quoted it as though it was their own philosophers as kind of a direct rip-off, it would be kind of a joke, like when Chekhov used to always make all the wisecracks about the Russians doing it first, kind of thing. Interesting. After Kirk's trial, imprisonment, and ultimately his rescue, we have learned that the Federation, in conjunction with the Klingons and the Romulans, have all conspired together to murder Chancellor Gorkon, ultimately for a purpose that is basically to create unbalance between the entire region, ultimately leading the Klingons to stay isolated, thusly causing their death eventually from not being allowing themselves to help themselves. It's kind of a sad case of events, but again, it mirrors that whole Russian-United States conflict of where they refused to ask for help during, say, like the Chernobyl incident of the mid-1980s. It's unfortunate, but it really shows what that whole thing in our own history really projected and how those events were really played out ultimately. But again, unfortunately, one of the things that this does is it too closely mirrors other events where it's so obvious what's going on. It's not like it's a earth-shattering epiphany that this is what's going on. If you were living in the time like I was, it was kind of obvious what they were alluding to, and at times that was good, but it really, it could have had a little bit more to it. Again, like, having the Savick character, an example, to be the one to betray them would have made much more interesting cinema and really a great twist. After much conspiracy, conjecture, and even a mind meld that was forced, we discovered that the Klingons do indeed have a bird of prey that has been modified to be able to fire while cloaked to the enemy, thus giving them an advantage that they would not normally have. This thusly then leads the Enterprise to contacting the Excelsior and Captain Sulu to request assistance to both meet at the Kittimar planet in order to evade the potential assassination of what now we consider to be the President of the United Federation of Planets. With both major leaders of both major powers being knocked off, it would make perfectly logical sense for war to break out between these two great superpowers, allowing them to then thusly annihilate one another. After playing cat and mouse with this cloaked Klingon vessel, eventually the Excelsior swoops in to take the heat off the Enterprise long enough for Spock and McCoy to modify a torpedo to take out the enemy ship, and thusly causing them to at least be able to then take out the assassination plot that's going on the planet below them. This is a great scene, some of the best cinematography I'd ever seen when it came to shipbuilding versus ship destruction. The use of the models was great because this was before CGI, so their ability to do this was actually really amazing, to the point of even the destruction of the bird of prey was recycled footage that they would use again in the next chapter of the Star Trek saga. So hats off to that group. This then takes us down to the planet's surface where Scotty, Kirk, even Captain Sulu and Spock all foil the assassination plot and save the President of the United Federation of Planets. It leads to a long-winded monologue that Captain Kirk gives about forgiveness and realizing that the price of peace is actually worth the endeavor of maybe even some personal loss and learning to forgive, especially when the stakes are as high as these were. It's a very emotional scene. The applause that follows, it was kind of cliche, but it makes sense because it was kind of like, it's kind of like the speech at the end of Rocky 4. I mean, it's a little bit stereotypical, but I mean, hey Adrian, we did it, so, hooray for that. So, and, rightly so. They did something very brave and very heroic, and it's only fair that he actually got a round of applause for, basically doing what he wouldn't have done even earlier in the film. So, good job to Captain Kirk. The end of the movie then cuts away with the two crews of both the Enterprise and the Excelsior thanking one another, and ultimately a nod between George Takei and William Shatner, kind of saying, goodbye, my friend, kind of like, because this movie officially and literally signs this crew out. They all kind of did an autographed montage at the end of the film at the credits to kind of sign the movie out and to be on their way. And they made the reference to, Peter Pan at the end with second star to the right and straight on till morning, which was a good homage to another great literary classic. But it's in all honesty, I always thought the ending to this was really well done. That the movie itself had some great tones to it, had a lot of really good messages to be conveyed. This is the first time we really see a Vulcan do anything kind of shady, which later on, whenever I get to doing some TV reviews and I start reviewing the TV series Star Trek Enterprise, I'll actually touch a little bit more on that, because that was always one of my favorite things about that television series that many other people actually shit on it for, was they said that they didn't like the fact that it kind of villainized the Vulcans in a way, and I actually thought it gave them some real depth. So good work to Star Trek VI for bringing that up. So on that note, I actually give Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, a rating of 6 out of 10. I know, you're thinking, wow, 6 out of 10, that's it? The thing is this is a really great movie. It's thoroughly enjoyable. It's the second Star Trek film I ever got to see in the theater. Considering that 5 was the one I saw before that, this was far better. Everything. But there are some things that I really didn't like about it, considering that I also had read the book before going to see this movie, and there was a lot of things in the book that were missing from this film that, to be quite honest, I thought really needed to be in the book, or in the movie. Carol Marcus's character, his ex-wife, whom he had his son with in the book, was killed in a Klingon attack, which kind of explains the hatred level he has at the beginning of the movie. He already had it to begin with, but it was amplified much more because of her death. And then again, like I had mentioned earlier in the review, Valeris's character, despite the fact that Kim Cattrall is a good actress and that the character wasn't really terrible, the character of Saavik really should have been the protagonist in this film for that particular function, just because she had a stake with this crew, and she knew this crew, and for her to actually betray them would just be so much better of a thing. Granted, it would kind of crap on the character, but I think that it actually would have been a interesting, dial back for the film and for the series, because then we would have literally taken a character that people liked and turned them into a villain. That's kind of a neat twist, and nobody would have thought otherwise of it. So again, 6 out of 10. It's a good movie. It's one of my personal favorites. It's one I actually frequently put in just because I do enjoy watching it. But there are some holes in it, and but they're not bad holes by any means. So that's why it gets what it gets. So again, as always, subscribe to the channel. Please leave your feedback and comments in the comment section below. Feel free to ask me any questions you wish in regards to anything you want, whether it's Trek related or not. I don't really care, because I'm getting ready to move on from Star Trek reviews for a little while and move on to some other genres, some other styles. Might even be some science fiction, but it's going to be different science fiction. So look forward to hearing from everybody and their feedback. So again, we're working on it.